Hey guys, welcome to our Wednesday afternoon live stream. I'm Heidi Priebe.
And I'm Denzel Mensah.
Today we are talking about one of the biggest, I'm not going to say complaints, but maybe like resistances that people tend to have to personality typing systems, whether it's MBTI, whether it's the Enneagram, whatever it is, which is the idea that personality types put people in boxes. A lot of what I usually hear in terms of like criticisms of any personality typing system really is something like, well, what about all my life experiences? Like, what about X, Y, or Z? What about these other things that affect me? And I think my initial answer to that is that type it isn't invalidating your experiences. It isn't saying that what you've either achieved or been through or whatever in your life, or which traits you've cultivated within yourself. It's not saying that those things don't have an impact on who you are. It's just saying that there is a certain way that you will filter those experiences, and personality type explains kind of which filters you're using in your brain to look at those experiences through, to process them, even to choose which experiences you have when you get the choice. So I think the question itself is a little bit, I'm not going to say flawed from the get-go, but not quite as accurate as it could be.
When people address the term boxes, does it box you? They kind of mean like, is it confining you into like even pretty much losing your individuality? Like, oh, so if I share a certain type with somebody else, does that mean like now we're like totally the same person? It's like, well, you can't only have 16 different types, and things like that. But then, as we always talk about, like when you learn about, the cognitive functions and everything, I think our individuality is best shown through the way that we use our cognitive functions. People of the same type or same quadra, but mostly the same type, can all have the same cognitive functions in the same order, but then you have to understand that their individuality shines in like how they use that certain cognitive function. So their upbringing, like if they grew up in I grew up in a very Christian household. So then naturally my FE and my NI as an ENFJ, like, and even my TI and SE, like everything kind of like circulates around, the philosophies of Jesus and what he believes, that how he believed that we should like live our life and everything. Now that could be looking very different from another ENFJ who uses the same functions but may not be as Christian. And then even if we're both Christians, it's like, well, I also grew up in an African household. So, my FE might be, a little bit different, because it took in different values, things like that. Like there's so many different nuances. And then when you bring in the 5 love languages, and then when you bring in the Enneagram type, and then not only Enneagram type, but then you have to bring in the instinctual variants and so many like other things, then it's like, whoa, you are definitely much more intricate of a person. However, as long as you share those same functions as somebody else, then you still fall underneath that umbrella. In my opinion, the box could really be a box, but it's not nearly as small of a box as you may assume for it to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like you hit the nail on the head when you said it's not as small of a box as people think it is. Like it's kind of like putting you under an umbrella of something. It's not saying like every single ISFJ is going to act exactly like this. That's not at all what personality type is about. That's a very important point that I think everyone needs to keep in mind when they're worried it's putting them in boxes. I think what they're actually worried about that they're not saying is they're worried that it is predictive. So they're worried that having a certain personality type means they're always going to do a certain thing, means that people are always going to react to them in a certain way, and they're always going to react to other people in a certain way. And that's absolutely not the case. So often if you're looking at a type and it mostly looks like you, but the weaknesses are like offensive to you, then that might not be your type, because like I find most people don't get offended by their actual weaknesses because they're kind of deeply aware of them, So yeah, it could be you if that's the case. And if so, I think that's when it gets into the area of like people get mad because they feel like it's trying to put them into a box when really they're just in the wrong box.
Yeah.
Because when you find your true type, like usually it should feel almost like very relieving that there is a sense of there's a reason why your mind functions the way it does. And I think usually that sense of relief comes from finding the type that actually fits you.
There are also a lot of people who dislike when they are accused of being a mistype, and that's a whole other thing. You know, like if you're being accused of being in the wrong box, I feel like, in my opinion, there's probably two things that you should do. You should ask, like, oh, well, what makes you think that? And then actually consider, am I in the wrong box for this reason? And genuinely try and, like, perspective shift to see like what they're seeing and maybe explain it. And maybe you might find out that, oh, maybe I am in the wrong box, like from that conversation, but you would have never known it. Which I just got back from Personality Hackers profiler training event in LA, and there were quite a few instances like that. There were like really crazy ones. Like INTPs who found out that they were INFJ, and stuff like that, for really different reason. I also believe that a lot of people can become like defensive because they put their identity in their type, and that's one thing that like I was also talking to my wife about recently. Like a few people like had asked me at one point, like, oh, what if you find out that you're a mistype? And I said, honestly, in the most modest way, I'd be like, oh, cool. Like, wow. Like, because when you understand that the box doesn't define you, but you are still an individual, then that's really all that matters. So for me, it's like, okay, if I did, I mean, I'm pretty positive that I'm an ENFJ. But if I did find out that I was ENTJ or, ESFP, ESFJ, INFJ, I don't know, I'll just be like, oh, wow, that's interesting. The only thing that would suck about that is that I have to now tell everyone who I've told, like, hey, I'm actually this type. But at the end of the day, that shouldn't change the way that people look at me, or at least, it doesn't change how I need to act. I feel like a lot of times people try to fit the box rather than allowing the box to fit them naturally. So we should understand that we should be ourselves, our natural selves, and then the tool is meant to like fix upon us. And I think that when you see type as not necessarily explaining everything about you and not really your identity, but just knowing that, hey, so like going back to my example, if I found out I was a different type, it's like, well, that's cool, because at the end of the day, I'm still Denzel, and I'd like to think that I'm still a really cool person, regardless of whatever type that I am. And so when you're able to see yourself in that manner, then you won't allow your type to be your identity. But a lot of people feel like, oh, well, people only think that I'm cool because when I tell them that I'm INFJ, and then they read the description, now they're seeing me through that lens. And if they find out that I'm not an INFJ, then they won't see how awesome I am. And it's like, we shouldn't really see it that way. You should just continue to be yourself, and understand once again that the box is huge. There's no type that's better than the other, and there's so many different variations to like how the types can look. So we shouldn't attach ourselves to a certain type and allow our identity to intertwine with that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It works in both directions. I think a big reason why people have trouble with the system is because they go, I don't want this to be my identity. But then I think part of that comes from they see other people who are very invested in the system who do use it as their identity.
Yeah.
And that can be equally as problematic because, like you said, like there's a lot of times when people get so excited about their type that it's almost like they try to fit themselves into the type. And I mean, you can do that if you want, but it's not really going to help you much. This system is not here to like insert its dominance over your life. It's not like there's someone in your brain and as soon as you take the test and get INTJ, like someone reaches into your brain and now you can only respond in an INTJ way. Like you're going to keep responding the same way no matter what. It's just giving language for what's already there. So again, if you feel like the way your type is described is not the way that you are, it's probably not your type. Mm-hmm. And if you feel like you're being boxed in or like misunderstood by the definition, again, probably not your type.
Like, I think that the way the tool can be helpful is helping you to not necessarily limit yourself, but to help you find a more natural and narrow path that's better fitted for you. And to elaborate on that, pretty much like I knew an ESFP who really admired an ENTJ. And she said, like, yeah, I just want to be like him because he's able to execute these plans and do this and do that. And I want to be able to get there. So she wanted to get to point D the same way that the ENTJ did. And I was like, whoa, you can get to that point, but I feel like it'd be better if you did it this way instead. So if you want, you can take the same exact path that the ENTJ did, and you may get there, but you'd be like very bruised and all of that because you're pulling on functions or talents that aren't as strong for you. Or you could get to point D your own way that's more natural to you, and you guys will still end up at the same place. Because at the end of the day, these types are, once again, it's supposed to be a tool to help you. So if you understand like, oh, this is the path that's most natural to me, which when it comes to life coaching, that's kind of what I help people do. Like that's usually the problem. Like they're trying to achieve point D, or they're trying to get to point D, but they're taking a path that's not as natural to them. And it's like, well, let's help identify what personality type you are. Okay, now that we know, let me show you a better path on how to get to that same exact conclusion. So you're not really limiting yourself, but you can still get there. And of course, like Heidi said, if you don't if you still want to take the other path, then okay, that's cool. You know, like you can do that, but and it's not like really to force you, but this is supposed to be a tool to help you get there. So if you are mistyped, or if you're like refusing to see yourself as a certain type, well, then you're kind of like what Heidi said. Once again, you're only cheating yourself in a way. You know, if Heidi was trying to achieve things the same way that an ESFP would, although it's only one letter difference, there's some different cognitive functions that are there that Heidi would have a lot harder of a time achieving, and she would have been better off just doing it the way that she was. So if Heidi was like, what's the word? Not disillusioned, but I forgot the word, but it's pretty much like when you're like really in denial of a certain, like, oh, no, I am this type. If Heidi just insisted that she was ESFP, while I'm like, Heidi, you're an ENFP, and if you want to really achieve point D, then you should really just accept that this is the type you are. It's not a punishment. It's a way to help you out. But I think a lot of people, because they get so attached to this identity part of theirs, delusional. That's it. Thanks, Tina. Like, yeah, if you're just really like delusional about like, no, this is the type that I am, and you're just fixated on it, and you're afraid that you're going to lose some sort of like value from that, then you're not going to allow the system to really help you. And you're kind of just only cheating yourself. And then on top of that, I think Heidi and I have also talked about it in other past things. Like you're telling people like, oh, I'm this type, but you're coming out in like a different way. And then that's where we get a lot of the inaccurate info that goes around online. And so then people who are actually the type that you think that you are, that you're telling people like, oh, well, I'm like this. And they're like, well, I'm not really like that. And maybe this is not my type. And then everybody gets confused. So it's like a huge just domino effect. And it sounds like a slippery slope, but like I've seen it happen. So yeah, I feel like the whole case in point is that, once again, typology isn't necessarily like supposed to confine you. If it's a box, it's a huge box with lots of wiggle room, and it's not supposed to create like a boundaries and limit you, but instead help you to find the best paths to be the best self that you have. It's supposed to be that type of tool, and you shouldn't allow your identity to get wrapped in it, but just allow it to be like a framework that you can use to even further explore your own identity.
So it's more about how you're processing things than what you're doing. And I think that's the problem people have, is like they don't want their behavior to be put in a box, but what they don't understand is that type doesn't actually say anything about your behavior. Mm-hmm. And any resource that tries to claim that you will behave a certain way because you're a certain type is not a valid resource, myself included. Again, my articles about what you'll do are meant to be jokes.
Hopefully we've made lots of sense today.
Yeah. That about sums it up. Thanks for tuning in, even if you're on holidays, guys. And let us know what you want to hear us talk about, and we will be back with you next week.
Awesome. See y'all.
I'm David Bowder, CEO of SPASIGMA. Every day, each of us is surrounded by a great diversity of people, and indeed, personalities. Some people we find it very easy to relate to. Others, not so much so. Our program exists to help you make sense of your own personality as well as the diverse personalities around you, to help you improve both your personal and professional lives. Shakespeare said, "To thine own self be true." We'll teach you to understand how to reach the diverse personalities around you, to communicate with them in a way that integrates who you are with who they are. So enough talk about all this. Welcome to SPA Sigma's Personality Quotient PQ program. Enjoy the journey.